You are listening to the Choose Your Struggle podcast, a member of the Shameless Podcast Network. Nobody knows your mission better than you, but sometimes you need someone to help you move the ball downfield. Whether by telling your story a little bit better, creating a fundraising strategy, engaging stakeholders, or improving culture. That's where I come in. I'll bring a combined decade's worth of experience in nonprofits, consulting, and politics to help your organization reach the next level. I practice an internal growth model, which means I work with your team to make strategic improvements using your existing strengths. So if you're ready to take that next step, reach out. You can find me at my website, jshifman.com, and I can't wait to hear from you.
Choose your struggle. Spread love. Choose your struggle.
Hello and welcome to another Monday Motivation episode of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. Today, little bit of I don't want to call it a trigger warning, but just a heads up. We're talking about caste, we're talking about racism, we're talking about tough topics that I'm not going to get 100% right. But that's okay. We need to be able to talk about these things. And that's the point of these Monday Motivations, is to hear from you. Now, as I said on the Friday podcast, big shout out to my listeners in Germany who percentage-wise, and to make that more clear, what percentage of people who are listening in that country to each episode. My listeners in Germany love the Monday Motivations, so shout out to the listeners in Germany. I want to hear from some of y'all. I would love to hear why these episodes are so cool to you, or why these are things you support. So today we're talking about caste, and I just finished reading that book, which you should all go check out. Caste was written by Isabel Wilkerson, who famously wrote The Warmth of Other Suns. Really fantastic writer, formerly of the New York Times. And it's all about challenging our perceptions for things that we would immediately say, oh, that's racism. And the two go hand in hand. And this is where I'm not gonna say this perfectly. You should read the book. But what Isabel Wilkerson was saying was that it goes beyond that simply labeling things as racism when they are clearly against those of a different race is kind of too easy, and it ignores a lot of the deeper issues, and that's where caste comes into play. Now, for those who are not familiar with this concept, essentially what Isabel was saying was that the U.S. system has a lot of similarities to the Indian system, which is very clearly a caste system because they're all the same race. You know, there's not that overt racism like there is here. So she makes the comparison between the Dalits, the untouchables as they're called in India, and blacks in the South during Reconstruction, and even still to today. Go read it. Fantastic book. But it made me think about an episode from my life. Obviously, as a white man, I was not on the receiving end, but it was sort of a wake-up call. Now, this is a ridiculous story. There's no other word to describe that. But in Cincinnati, I owned a condo in the neighborhood of East Walnut Hills, which is where I used to live. I used to live in this condo. I was on the board of the redevelopment foundation for the neighborhood. We did a lot of work around trying to make sure there was equitable solutions to things like housing and development. I was the vice president of that board for a while. But during this time, I lived first in a condo, and then when my wife and I bought a house, we moved out of that. And the condo was in a gated building. It was an old schoolhouse, really beautiful building, and sort of not like the rest of the neighborhood. And I bought it because when I got it, I was single. It was a perfect bachelor pad. There were no sort of other intentions other than, wow, I get to live in this penthouse condo, living large, right? I mean, it was ridiculous. But that's not why most people lived in this building. They lived in it because this neighborhood was centrally located, and you were right outside of downtown, but you didn't pay the downtown prices. There was good food nearby. Like I said, it was you're right off the highway. I mean, it had everything you're looking for if you were a person who wanted to be near downtown but didn't want to live in downtown. Now, the neighborhood itself was mostly black. It was majority minority. And for a long time, it was forgotten by the city of Cincinnati. In fact, when my grandparents' generation was growing up, this was sort of the second downtown. But over the last, 40, 50 years, it had become a neighborhood that most of the city tried to forget intentionally. I mean, it was a black neighborhood that had the first black business district in the city. And the city was just like, y'all on your own for a long time. So this building was it stuck out like a sore thumb. It was right in the middle of other, it was the only white community in this part of the neighborhood. And a lot of people moved in before and after me for that reason. They were redeveloping parts of the neighborhood, so it was speculation, and they wanted to be near the downtown scene and near the some of the new restaurants coming into the neighborhood, that kind of thing. But they didn't want to live in the neighborhood. I mean, flat out. That's why they got this building. It was, you had to have a code to get in the gate. You had to have a code to get in the front door. It was not a communal thing at all. It was very much people wanting their privacy. And when my wife and I moved into our house, I rented my condo to a well-known rapper, Talib Kweli. He, for those of you who are fans, he is, Cincinnati's big for him. It's where he got his start with a group called Mood. And, he and High Tech, who's from Cincinnati, a producer, did some of Talib's best work together. So his sort of business manager approached me and said he's looking for a place near downtown, but not in downtown, and, private enough that he can have his alone time. And that's why they wanted my condo. And so I never met Talib. I worked exclusively with his business manager. And they rented it. And occasionally she would send me pictures just to be like, hey, this is cool. And, it'd be Talib, Mos Def, Dave Chappelle, guys like that chilling, in my condo. And that was really cool to me, right? But very quickly it became apparent that the rest of the building was just aghast, pearl clutching over this episode, over the fact that they had this famous rapper living in the building. Now, not everybody. I don't want to make it out to seem like everybody. There was a select few who were the loudest voices. But they set out from the start to drive him out of the building. And it was ugly from the beginning. Not a month into them living there, the first complaint was received about loud music. And I'm not going to say that they didn't play loud music. I'm sure that they did. But they were far from alone in doing that. For some more context, I lived there for 2 years. The walls were not, they weren't thin, but they weren't, you could hear through them. There were people who had parties. There were people who, I think the best story I can say is when I got off the elevator, actually with my parents and my realtor, we were just, spending a Saturday afternoon looking at places, and we get off the elevator on the 5th floor, where the top where I ended up buying this condo, and weed smoke was so thick in the hallway, you could see it. And my dad looked at me and said, "Well, I guess you got to buy it now." And that's how this building was. So it was very much sort of a live and let live thing until a famous rapper moved in. Now, there were some warning signs. There was only one other black resident in the building, and she moved out about 3 months after I moved in and pulled me aside. We had started a conversation in the hallway, and so we knew each other. We weren't close, but we knew each other. And she pulled me aside and was like, "Just letting you know, they've been very rude to me. I can't live here anymore." And it was sort of the kind of thing like, you're one of the only people that actually talks to me. So there were warning signs that this wasn't going to be a good situation. But Talib, paid his rent, and I was cool with it. I was like, yeah, I've got this awesome rapper living here who I've looked up to since I was in middle school, right? But like I said, a month in, the first complaint for loud music, and then when I didn't do anything, I was just like, well, whatever. People do shit like that in this building all the time. It became an onslaught, and by the 9 months in, I got a letter from the managers of the building that they were going to be evicted if I didn't kick them out myself. And that was through a clause in the lease that or in the ownership that said that if you were renting it to someone else, and they were bad tenants, they reserved the right to kick them out, that kind of thing. So I immediately fought it. I said, I had the right to have a disciplinary hearing, and they said, great, bring him. I said, no, I'm coming, and I sat down, and the day before this, I actually knew somebody in the building. We'd been friends for about 20 years. It just coincidence we both lived there. And she called me to tell me that she was one of the people that complained, and her complaint was about a man throwing trash on the ground in the parking lot. Or outside the parking lot, I should say, on the sidewalk. And I said, well, how do you know this person was going to my condo? I mean, was it Talib? And she said, no. And I said, well, how do you know? And she said, well, he's a black guy. Now, to be clear, this was outside the unit. It was in front of the unit on the sidewalk. This was just a guy walking past who threw trash on the ground. Now, you shouldn't throw trash on the ground, obviously. But this had nothing to do with the unit. And she wrote a letter complaining because he must know Talib because he's black. How ridiculous is that, right? Now, that's pretty overt racism. So anyway, I get to this hearing, and the complaints are everything from, like I said, the one about the trash to loud music to somebody who, this was ridiculous, someone who used a code to enter the building who clearly didn't live there, which is a thing that we all did. I gave my code to everybody. I didn't care. If I trusted them, it means that they weren't going to rob the place. It means they were coming over, and I didn't want to have to go down to the main floor to let them in. That's ridiculous. It was a 5-minute trip to get down to the main floor, so I would just give them my code. We all did that, but that was a complaint. Smoking weed. There was somebody on the 3rd floor who lodged a complaint because they could smell the weed smoke. And they took that complaint for face value. It wasn't, maybe somebody else on your floor is smoking weed. Nope. Had to be the rapper on the 5th floor, right? So I hear all of this, and I bring up the fact that I had gotten this call from one of the the people who'd written a complaint about that one about the person throwing trash. And luckily for me, somebody else who knew her in a moment of compassion was like, actually, I know that person. She's racist. We can disregard that complaint. And so I had my in. I was like, well, is it possible, we're admitting that one was pure racism. Is it possible that these are mostly because of race? And you would have thought that I told them to go fuck themselves. They were so pissed at me that I would even, say that racism could play a role in this. They threw me out of the room. They said, this hearing is over. We're siding against you. Get out. It was that quick. It was like literally the person got up, opened the door, and said, you need to leave now, because I dared accuse them of maybe allowing race to play a role in this situation. So now what I did was I immediately called a realtor, and I said, I'm selling this place because if I didn't, they were going to go to court and get Talib and his business manager evicted from the building. And I would not stand for that. And I contacted Home, which is an organization that works on housing in situations like this, and they filed a complaint with the city against the management company, against the board in the condo board. But nothing came of that, and so I sold the building. I didn't lose money. I didn't make as much as I would have if I'd held on to it, but whatever. I just was like, I'm not gonna let this happen. So looking back, was there racism at play? Of course there was. I mean, the whole thing was based on racism, but more than that. I'm now aware through reading this book, through having conversations with people, that the bigger issue there was caste. That here was a building full of upper-class white people. This was not a cheap building. It's an expensive building to live in. And they were so angry that somebody from a perceived lower caste was allowed into their building and allowed to just live their life. Talib wasn't hurting anybody. Did he play loud music at times? I'm sure he did. Just like other people in the building. Did he allow other people to have his code? I'm sure he did, just like other people in the building. Did he smoke weed? Hell yeah, just like I did. I smoked with one of the neighbors who lodged a complaint against Talib for smoking weed. That is a simple fact. I smoked with these people. They later complained against Talib for smoking weed in the building. So what's clear there is yes, it's because he's black, but more than that, it's because that this was a group of people that the people living in this building had done their best to get away from. This was their space in their minds. This was a rich white people's space. They paid, what they thought good money to be in this building. They shouldn't have to be around other people that weren't like them. And that was the bigger issue here. Now, obviously, like I said, racism was a major factor, but at that point, Talib could have been anyone that wasn't a rich white person, and the same issue would have been at play, because to these people, he was just other, and he didn't deserve to be around them in doing the exact same things they were. It was a challenge to them. It was forcing them to be uncomfortable. And that is why he was driven out of the building. So, like I said, I've never actually spoken to Talib, just as business manager. If somehow, Talib, you hear this, I'm sorry for what you went through in my condo. If somehow one of the people who lives there hear this, I haven't forgotten this. And the end of that story is, I left that hearing and drove to my favorite, one of my favorite nonprofits in Cincinnati. It's a really incredible organization called Mortar that a couple of buddies of mine were running at the time, that sought to do business training and entrepreneurship support for traditionally ignored communities, mostly black, in Cincinnati. And I made a small, not a large donation, but a small donation in honor of that building. And it was like, look, if you're going to do this, I need to offset this in some way that I can feel comfortable with, and that is by making this donation. So, obviously that's not enough, and there was no win here. We all lost. But I needed to do something to feel better and feel like I could offset it even just a little bit. So anyway, that's my story about watching the caste discrimination at play. I want to hear from you. Let me know your stories. As usual, the first person to reach out gets a magnet. Anyone who reaches out gets a sticker, including those overseas. I will find a way to get something to you. So reach out. Like I said, Germany, I want to hear from y'all. Netherlands, I want to hear from y'all. Y'all heard your shout out on last episode too. Everybody, I want to hear from you. Most importantly, have a great week and choose your struggle.